So we're talking here with David Van Deusen, who's the president of the Vermont AFL-CIO, the Labor Federation in the state of Vermont. So how's things going there? How are you doing today, David?
We're doing great, John. We're just coming off of a big convention, our annual convention that we had last weekend before last. We had well over 100 delegates and alternates registered, lots of guests coming from allied organizations. And frankly, it was one of our biggest conventions we've had in decades. So we're on the upswing here in Vermont. We're engaging in a new type of unionism here in the Green Mountain State. And we're looking to build a truly democratic labor movement, one committed also to social justice unionism. But that's a long road to hoe. It's a bit of a culture change for the AFL-CIO. And we're looking to do our part here in Vermont. Cool.
So, of course, you're famous or infamous, depending on who you're talking to, for your council having called for a general strike if Trump tries to hold on to office. This was, of course, way back when. It seems like centuries ago now. But maybe you'd like to comment on that, explain a little bit about that.
Well, as you recall, in November of 2020, going right up to Inauguration Day for that matter, there were serious concerns that there would be a neo-fascist coup in this country. The recent statements made by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA confirmed that those worries were very true. We were one rogue general away from siding with the Trump administration, from being in a very, very dangerous situation in the United States of America. So while this was unfolding, again, November 2020, we brought the question of what we would do if democracy came into crisis to our rank and file members at our 2020 convention. We debated the issue for an hour. And in the end, 87% of our delegates voted to authorize a general strike should there not be a transfer of power on January 20th, 2021, as our Constitution requires. It was the right thing to do. We are proud of our actions. Our members showed that they're willing to stand up and say no to fascism. And this is the type of thing, though, that we need to be discussing as a broader labor movement, because it is pretty clear to me that we're not out of the woods yet. And the Republican Party has changed from being largely a conservative party to one which in many parts of the country is embracing anti-democracy and something approaching like a fascistic worldview. So we expect there to be other challenges we'll face in the future, and the working class, organized through the unions, need to be ready to step up and defend democracy. And at the same time, we need to be able to fight to build more democracy. This is not just about keeping a system which largely is not serving the true interests of the working class as a status quo. We need to be going on the offensive to build real working class solidarity, real working class democracy, power on the shop floor, and a new kind of world, one that isn't geared towards the needs and desires of the 1%, but one that delivers on the desires, the needs of the 99%.
And what was the response of the National AFL-CIO to that call?
We did not see eye to eye on that issue. So the National AFL-CIO took a different road. They hitched their wagon to the Democratic Party nationally. And I think they held their breath and hoped that things would work out. I'm not a big believer in the notion of hoping things will work out. I believe that our destiny is ours to be seized. In order to do that, we have to be proactive. And at times we have to take risks. So the Vermont AFL-CIO in the future will continue to do what needs to be done to advance a working class movement. But we are also looking to have dialogue with allies from across the US in order to try to build a progressive caucus within the National AFL-CIO, so we could seek some political and social and cultural changes from within. That would be a longer process. And those discussions have started in a number of places. But as a labor movement, that's what we got to be putting some priority on now.
So you said we were one general away from a coup. Of course, if the military is going to be the guardians of democracy in this country, we're in pretty bad shape, I would say.
Well, it's a bit of an upside down world. I was just talking about it with a couple of people the other day. The good guys in the immediate issue of whether or not there was going to be a right-wing coup in this country were the military and the CIA. I almost pined for the good old days when the military and the CIA were the ones not to be trusted, that we had to organize against, right? But that shows you how far right and how crazy Donald Trump has taken the Republican Party. But when you hear the Joint Chiefs of Staff say he believed that it was likely that we were in a coup type situation, that we were having a Reichstag type moment like we saw in Germany in the 30s, that should make people wake up, all right? I mean, that is coming from the top general in this country and the head of the CIA. That's another world of concern that we need to have. And I don't pretend that representational democracy, the way we practice it today, which largely is driven by money and those with the purse strings behind campaigns, I'm not trying to suggest that that has delivered the kind of wins we need to have as a labor movement. But what I am suggesting is that at least the veneer of democracy we have is preferable to a dictatorship. It is preferable to overt fascism or neo-fascism. And so we do need to defend those democratic or representational bodies that we do have, so we do not slip further to the right. But as I was saying earlier, we can't just do that. That's not good enough, right? When you look at Washington, D.C., and you see that the PRO Act is not passing, that the Democrats can't get behind it in sufficient numbers, even though they have a majority in both chambers of Congress to pass it, it shows you that our system is broken. It shows you that one of the top Democrats who receives millions of dollars from campaign contributions from the wealthy and corporations, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, when he refuses to even consider the notion of doing away with a filibuster to advance progressive legislation, pro-labor legislation, it shows you that our democratic process is not working the way that perhaps at best our founding fathers envisioned it. But we still need to defend what we have while we fight to go further. The kind of democracy that we envision as the Vermont AFL-CIO is one where we start to have true democracy, not just in a voting booth when no one's looking every 4 years, but on the shop floor, in the factories, in our workplaces, one where we have a true say in the daily conditions of our lives. And further, we also believe in a direct democracy, whereby we should be fighting to change our structure of government, at least here in Vermont, to have a town meeting-based referendum system, which would build in participatory democracy and give people the power, not just 150 folks in the State House, in the House of Representatives. And we could achieve these things. We could go much further, and we could create a true social, a new social contract that would benefit working people if working people as a start, as if the unions, if we act in a united fashion to build our power, not rely on the Democrats, but rely on ourselves, rely on a new sense of unity, a new sense of action to push as far as we have to for these wins. We are the great majority of this country and the world, in fact, the working class. And we have that power inherent within us. It's a question of us realizing that power and acting upon it.
Well, you mentioned the PRO Act, which in times gone by was called labor law reform. And under Jimmy Carter, with an overwhelmingly Democratic Congress, under Bill Clinton with the same, and also under Obama in his first time in office, that was really the major goal of labor, was labor law reform. And it never even came close to passing. So when you look at that, when you look at the fact that really, I mean, many people would say, and I agree with them, that the Democrats are doing very little, just barely the minimum, to oppose the Republicans' machinations. Many people would say that we need a working class party, maybe starting at the local level, but representing a clear break of the working class from the Democrats. Would you comment on that?
Well, of course we do. That should be blatantly obvious to anybody that doesn't have a vested interest in eating from the scraps of the table of the Democratic Party. And here in Vermont, we do have that. We have something called the Vermont Progressive Party, which is essentially a democratic socialist party that was the beginning phases of it came out of Bernie Sanders' terms when he served as mayor of Burlington. And the Progressive Party here, which we work very closely with as organized labor, has 10 or so seats in the state house, the House and Senate, until recently had the lieutenant governor position, which is a statewide elected position, and currently has the auditor position, which is statewide elected. In Burlington, which is our largest city, they are the largest party in that city, and they have half the seats on the city council, with Democrats and independents having the rest. So we can show by looking at the experience of Vermont that it's possible. And when you have that party in place, when you have folks that are willing to stand by you, when you stand by them, it starts to change the political equation. But don't let me overstate it, right? This is still a smaller party than both the Democrats and the Republicans in Vermont, but it's relatively new. I mean, we're talking about a party that's about 20 years old, that's already competing in statewide races, right? That already has its own caucus, independent caucus in the state house that articulates pro-union democratic socialist positions in a statewide platform. So we do need to look at those kind of options in the United States and at large beyond Vermont, be that taking another look at the Movement for a People's Party, or be it building out the Progressive Party as a nationwide party. These are things we got to do. But it's clear as day that when the Democrats, no matter how many times we put a majority, labor that is, into Congress in Washington, D.C., how many times, no matter how many times we elect a Democratic president in the United States, we're not seeing our agenda move forward. And let's not forget that it was Bill Clinton and the Democrats that led the charge to adopt NAFTA, right? That killed millions of good union jobs in this country. Let's not forget it was the Democrats that led the charge for mandatory minimums, which locked up hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million Black men around this country. So when we talk about real reform, you know, when AFL-CIO of Vermont talks about real reform, we're not talking about tinkering with one thing or another 25 cents towards the minimum wage. We need structural reform in Washington and in the different state capitals around this country. And it's clear as day to me, we're not going to get that by relying on the Democratic Party. So labor has to act independently. We have to look at the alternatives of building our own political party, sure, or aligning ourselves with a different leftist political party. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that no political party is going to do our work for us. Our real power is in our unity, in our solidarity, in our organizing on the shop floors and in the communities. And it's not till we get our own house in order. It's not until we act in solidarity with these social movements that are broader than just labor alone that we'll really be able to drive the political debate and discussion and movement in North America. But we can do this and we will do this, but we need to change from within so we could change from without.
So pivoting to some very real issues of right now, you have on the one hand, for instance, the drive nationwide to what it amounts to prohibiting women, or at least working class and poor women, from getting an abortion. And that is directly linked with the so-called voter suppression, and even more important, in my opinion, voter nullification by different Republican-controlled state legislatures. And so my question is, shouldn't labor, starting possibly with state councils, shouldn't labor be organizing mass protests against this sort of thing?
Yes, but those protests, those actions, whatever they may end up looking like, need to be done, not in Vermont and San Francisco or New York City. They need to be taking place in Texas. They need to be taking place in Alabama. They need to be taking place in Georgia and Florida, in the front lines of where these reactionary moves by the Republican Party are taking place. That's where we're going to have impact, and that's where we're going to have say. Now, unfortunately, me and you, right? I understand you're out on the West Coast, and here I am in the Green Mountains. We're not the ones who are going to define what those actions are going to be. But we would be well served if the National AFL-CIO would provide more support, more organizers, more resources to the state labor councils and to the CLCs in those areas to help make that possible. Now, if we took the gross amount of money we spend as organized labor out of lobbying or out of big sections of our lobbying efforts, if we took it away from the campaign contributions that we give, millions and millions of dollars to crappy Democrats that don't have our back, and we put that into hiring organizers, assigning them to these key states to help the CLCs and the labor federations fight back and organize and build true rank and file networks on the shop floors, then we could be in a position to really push back against the dangers which we see emerging in many states, including the South, Midwest, and parts of the West.
I mean, to me, like I know personally, dozens of women out here in California who are, of course, not directly affected by the anti-abortion law passed in Texas, but are absolutely furious about it. And so I am inclined to feel like start wherever we are and organize wherever we are, and hopefully that will light a fire or encourage those within those states, which oftentimes the unions tend to be weaker in those states because the right to work states and a lot of other things, both weaker and possibly more conservative.
Well, in part, where labor is weak is we're weak because in some places, because of the convoluted politics we've been expressing in the national level for some decades now. At one side of the mouth, we say we oppose NAFTA. On the other side of the mouth, we're endorsing Bill Clinton, right? And the other side of the mouth, we say we support Black Lives Matter, but then I don't mean me and you, but I mean the national labor movement is scared to engage with real Black community leaders to try to support them in their changes to radically transform their communities, largely in the inner cities. So until we actually have a consistent and meaningful political stance on these broad issues, folks are going to wonder, well, what the hell is labor doing for me? As far as I could tell, they're just backing a bunch of people that don't back us. Right. So we got to put money where our mouth is. But at the same token, I don't dismiss the notion that we shouldn't be also acting locally on issues that perhaps are more acute in other regions. I'm happy to report that here in Vermont, we're presently down the road of considering and seeking to adopt a constitutional change in our state constitution that would make abortion a right, the right to abortion, guaranteed for all women under all circumstances for every woman in Vermont. That's something the Vermont AFL-CIO, of course, supports, and that's something we'll continue to support. And I believe that minimum in a couple of years, there's a process involved, will pass. But that's not doing a damn thing for women down in Texas right now. If I was thinking outside the box a little, maybe the organized labor should be taking some of the money away from the bad investments we make in elections, and perhaps even creating a travel fund for women to leave Texas, to go to other states where it is legal and it is safe, and that they could get the procedures that they choose to have concerning control over their own body. I mean, that's one idea, but again, we need to see the real fight by working people in Texas, in Georgia, in Florida. That's where we need to see the fight, and we need to be supporting them in any way we possibly can.
Right. Just by way of example, when police see a cop in a completely different state just shooting down some Black man with complete impunity, then that sends the message all throughout the country that any cop can do this. And I have to say, here in Oakland, I've been, over the years, been to probably dozens of Black Lives Matter protests about these same types of murders all throughout the country. And to be quite blunt about it, with one single exception, the labor movement has been entirely missing in action in these protests.
Well, I think that you would have to look on a case or region by region basis. We proudly supported Black Lives Matter here in Vermont. We proudly were publicly in support of reform, law enforcement reform here to make police departments more accountable to their citizens. And at our recent convention, we were also proud to invite Black Lives Matter, not Black Lives Matter, a group called Black Perspective, which has been very engaged on these issues out of Burlington, to our convention to talk about the struggles they face and to discuss with us ways that we can be more mutually supportive of each other. So those kind of relationships need to start at the ground floor, right? And we need to be having more of those conversations. We can't be afraid as labor to engage in these social movements and what have you. And let's not forget that huge numbers of Black Americans, Latino Americans, et cetera, are part of organized labor. We're looking at auto workers, we're looking at the laborers, we're looking at AFSCIO, we're looking at SCIU, huge sections. So we need to represent not just the more narrow self-interest of our members when they're bargaining table, when they're looking to get some fair raises and keep their good health care. We have to do that and we'll do it well, but we have to go beyond that. And we have to address the needs and concerns of our members in their communities around the things that they suffer or deal with day to day. I mean, and that is an amplification of our power too, because as long as we are narrowly focused, if Black Perspective or Black Lives Matter is just looking at quote unquote issues of the Black community, or labor is just looking to bargain that next contract, right? Then we're in different silos. And when we're in different silos, we're divided and we're not taking a holistic approach to the very deep and very complex challenges that we face as a working class in general. So we need to be supportive of each other. We can't live in silos and we got to act as one movement. And in order to do that, we have to develop those relationships over a period of time and that those notions of trust where we're there for each other and showing up for each other when it matters.
You know, I was in Ferguson just a few days after Michael Brown was killed, when it seemed the entire Black community was mobilized. And I talked with one guy who was a UAW member there in that area. And he told me, he said that his local union president had told him, this is not our battle.
Well, that's fucked up because it is our battle. Absolutely, right. It's our battle.
And so, but it seems to me that the key is for the unions to actually not just, I mean, it's important to have those conversations and have representatives speak at different conventions and so on. But what's also extremely important is to be mobilizing the membership to come out to these protests, not just, 10 or 20 of the old faithful, but a real drive into the membership in the workplaces, encouraging them and mobilizing them to come out and participate in these protests.
Yeah, of course. But in order to do that, I mean, because I'm not trying to live in some sort of utopian world here. In order to effectively do that, we also have to put, before anything else, and as far as I'm concerned, this should be the #1 priority of all of organized labor, is we need to invest time, energy, and serious effort into building networks of rank and file workers in every single union shop, at every single shift, in every single place, in every state, all across the country. So if I today, as president of AFL-CIO, say, listen, we're going to endorse this rally and we're going to go to it, whatever it may be, if we don't have the infrastructure already there to make that turnout mean something, then basically we're just forever going to be dealing with in a world of symbolism. And we don't want symbolism, we want power.
Right.
So the #1 strategic priority of the Vermont AFL-CIO right now, that our executive director is tasked with, that certain other leaders and activists are tasked with, are going to every single union shop of our hundreds of unions shop and meeting with the workers, right? Circumventing, in some cases, the local leadership and sitting down with the workers directly and saying, listen, we want you to decide. You pick them, you elect them, whatever you want to do. We want that representative who's going to be a local union contact that we could reach out to get the word out to you on issue X, Y, or Z, or mobilization X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. And once we develop that network, once we have that in place, and for us, that's going to take us I would imagine a couple years before it's more mature, then we're going to be in a position where our mobilizations will mean a hell of a lot more than they have in the past. I would rather take less action on whatever the new crisis is on any given day and put more action into developing that network over a period of 1 year or 2 years as a long-term investment, right? That I see as the number one thing. The National AFL-CIO, they should be prioritizing the same thing. And in some regards, I know they've discussed it, or the late Richard Trumka discussed doing something like that. But really, it has come to nothing so far, or nothing on the scale that we need it to be. So that's what we got to do if we're going to make our words mean something down the line when it matters.
But doesn't developing a network and actually mobilizing the membership around the issues that, including the political issues, don't the two go hand in hand? I mean, don't they have to be done together?
I know what you mean. You got to use the muscle or it goes into atrophy, right? So some years ago, I was a union rep for the Agency of Transportation of Vermont. And in Vermont, we had, when I worked there, we had 60 plus garages scattered around the state, you know, with a bunch of workers here and there and everywhere else. We had very little union participation and very low union density in this sector. I mean, they were union, they had a contract, but probably, if I recall, their membership rate was something around 60%, which is a unhealthily low number. So we did kind of what you're suggesting at the same time. Myself and a number of stewards went around to the garages. We built this network, and as we built it, we would exercise it. You know, one of the ranking stewards in one occasion, you know, wrote an update, I recall, bargaining update of how we got to fight back against these draconian plans that the governor at the time had, and asked all of the local union contacts, which at that time was probably half the garages, to distribute them among the guys and to have the guys sign a petition and things like this. And so then our local union contacts, one per shop, got used to this, and we utilized it more and more as we developed it. So they do go tandem with each other, but you can't expect to deem this is what we're doing, and then there's a network there, and then it's gonna, you know, all come together. Like, this is something that has to evolve over a period of time. But if you don't use it, and if that network isn't utilized, it will revert back to, you know, or it could revert back to the unhealthy place it was before. I mean, the end game, as far as I'm concerned, though, is I wouldn't want to just control. I wouldn't want to have a central body like the state executive board control that network or have the monopoly on one-way communications. I would like to see those communications go both ways and laterally. So a local contact in one shop or one factory could also be talking with those in a number of different factories in the region if there's a common issue or desire for solidarity, right? So I see that means of communication going up, going down, and going sideways.
I mean, for instance, if labor were mobilizing, let's say, to oppose the Republicans' nationwide drive for voter suppression and voter nullification, and if it were going union shop to union shop and explaining to members and so on, for, you know, and it's saying on such and such a date, we're going to have a mass protest, even on a work day. Then the people that step forward and say, yeah, I like that, I want to get involved, that in itself, in a practical way, would start to develop that kind of a network that you're talking about.
Well, it's my experience that these things don't, I think it's foolish or unrealistic to think that they're going to somehow organically just happen. If they were going to just organically happen, sometime in the last 100 years, we would have seen it happen in this country, right? That something has to be built. It has to be meticulously built one step at a time. But yes, I mean, as you develop a network, as you develop an internal structure, then in good conditions, it begins to become a self-driving force, right? And it becomes something that workers can utilize with or without the leadership, in a sense. So anyway, I think this is the direction I know this is the direction we need to go. We could get bogged down on the weeds on it probably for all day long. I'd be happy to come back in a couple of years and tell you how it's going here in Vermont.
Right. So the last topic that I'd like to get your thinking on is, as you know, I just got back from Seattle, where the
Mhm.
carpenters are in a major rebellion against their own union leadership, which has this commitment to what they call regaining market share, which is a business term if there ever was one. And what it means is to cut or keep down the union wages so that union carpenters don't get too much of a higher pay than the non-union carpenters. In other words, that's really the race to the bottom. And in my experience, you see that it's not just the carpenters union. And for instance, here in Oakland, like I talked to clerks, grocery clerks at the store where I shop, which is union. I talked to city workers working in the street. Most of them that I talk to don't even know the name of their union. And I don't blame them. It's because the union is entirely absent in their lives. It's not really fighting for them on a day-to-day basis around the issues of wages and working conditions and so on. And so I think that a rank and file rebellion along those lines is also necessary. Maybe you'd like to comment on, maybe not specifically on Seattle since you're not there, but on that point in general.
Look, I don't know enough about the specifics of what's going on right now with the carpenters in Seattle to comment on that in any sort of educated way.
Right.
I do know this. The fight to make unions a true power in this country, the fight to make them truly the representative voice of the working class, certainly revolves around the union, which is composed of all the workers together, every day exercising their rights on the shop floor. We had a situation at the Burlington airport it was unfolding over a period of months, but a couple of weeks ago, our new steward up there and our vice president's name is Damian Gilbert. Our steward up there, who's new, pretty new, David Carmen, they fought and won getting the airport director fired. This is our only major airport in Vermont. That guy was abusing workers, treating them like garbage for some time. We filed grievances. We've been fighting through the regular channels you do. But I'll tell you what got the goods. We did petitions. We did T-shirts. We got days. We fought like hell, the rank and file, not a union rep, not the paid staff, right? The rank and file through their stewards fought like hell to get this guy fired. And you know what? For the first time in the history of the city of Burlington, the city council voted to fire the guy and uphold the rights of the workers. Now, if you were to go to that airport this afternoon, there's not one person there who doesn't know exactly what union they're a member of, what the number is, right? What they do, who the president is, who the vice president is, who their steward is. That is what we got to be doing every day, everywhere, fighting for what is right. We can't just, the union can't be a third party. The union can't be a thing that just shows up to negotiate a contract and then leaves. The union truly has to be the organic expression of those workers who are members in that shop. And those rank and file need to drive the direction of the union. They need to drive what the policies are and the issues they fight on. And what the staff and what the officers need to be doing is providing the resources that those workers can use to further their campaigns. And if we become anything less than acutely responsive to the desires and needs of the rank and file, then we've already ceded the territory of ownership away from the workers, and that's going to have a negative impact. So it's got to be rank and file driven, and you got to listen to the members because the members are the union, and there's no two other ways about it.
Last point. I would say in my 75 years on this planet, there's a greater social crisis now, and I lived through the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and so on. There's a greater social crisis now than I've ever seen. And in fact, if 10 or 15 years ago, you had told me that we were going to be seeing what we've seen over the last 6 months, I would have told you that you're some kind of hysteric or something, that it'll never happen. So things can really spiral out of control a lot quicker than I wouldn't say even, maybe more so amongst those of us who were longtime union activists. And in my own case, and maybe yours also, I don't know, longtime socialist, can spiral out of control a lot quicker than a lot of us would think.
Agreed.
Maybe
Agreed.
you'd like to comment on that.
No, that's true. I mean, let's look at the events around the transfer of power, or the threat that there wouldn't be between Biden and Trump. We are a couple bad circumstances away from being in an existential crisis as a people and as a country. And labor needs to be prepared for those kind of scenarios. We're not going to be prepared to face those kind of situations by deferring our power to any political party, including, especially including the Democratic Party. This is in fact one of the major reasons why we need to grow our power independently. We need to become rank and file driven. We need to dedicate our labor movement to social justice and not just the economics. The economics, though, is a huge part of it. We still have to deliver on the bread and butter issues. So I'm optimistic. I have no doubt whatsoever that history is on our side. I have zero doubt that we are going to prevail and win. And I don't doubt at all that we're going to transform the national AFL-CIO from within. These are our historic tasks put before us. That and defending and expanding democracy and economic equity is what we need to be focused on. And we are, and we will win.